That's great.
All right.
So-
All right, so introductions.
We're on Chris.
This is Christine Canaly.
And I am
Say your name.
Christine Canaly, Director of the San Luis Valley Ecosystem Council, and we're a public lands advocacy organization. But previous to that, we did a lot of focus on water with the Citizens for San Luis Valley Water, so
And what year did you come here?
in 1988.
Hold on. I won't stutter you in the middle of the presentation. I know I can master
Wipe your
it.
brow too.
All right.
Ready? All right. And I'm Mark Jacobi, the facilities manager currently up at the Orient Land Trust in Valley View Hot Springs.
Okay, so what you already started on reminds me of many questions and things I want to talk about. One, Kizan says she thinks Crestone is like a mouse that roars, and one of her favorite things and things that she loves most about the community is their activism and how you guys or we take on these we take things on and we take it all the way to the top and win. So you guys have been huge players in that. I guess there's no question in there, but
Yeah, I mean, there's been, that spirit has really been here, I think. And, just looking at the history around that room, you realize that there have been people that have really, even if you go back to articles that were published in whatever the newspaper was around the turn of the, last century in the early 1900s, this place was always focused on as a place to come, and the waters were always promoted as waters that can heal you. And of course, at that time, people were dealing with different kinds of illnesses and conditions, and this place was kind of advertised as a place to come to be able to convalesce and kind of find yourself and gather yourself. So, and it was probably, you could look at it like, it was a promotion after all the mines shut down. But the reality was, I think that this place kind of always had that presence. And I think over the last, 100 and some years, it's really evolved. And I think, the whole valley, I think, could be looked at that way, actually. It's at the headwaters. And, our focus has been the environment. I think it's just really important right now.
Because it's a place of healing, it's drawn a lot of the local people and the local population here now. And I don't think our experience was unique in any way. I mean, I think a lot of us came here thinking we were going to get away from it all, experience life on a deeper level, and we were fine with that. That's why we chose to come to a remote place like this. And then when we got here, then we also find that other aspect of civilization comes into play. And as I put it before, is like, this is where the rich and powerful come to exploit as well. And it was that collision of the people who kind of wanted a deeper way of living met the people who wanted to just exploit the landscape for commodity purposes. And that's where the clashes began. And I think the people who had come here just decided to dig in. It's like, where else are we going to go? If we don't make a stand here, where would we? And so I think that's one of the major galvanizations around here that really played out. And whether it was with the water things or the Air National Guard, we were being attacked, and we fought back. So
I'm concerned that the next generation that you would pass the buck to is challenged and picking up the baton. How do you feel about that?
I disagree.
yeah, I think there's a lot of dormant properties, I think, in this generation. They've got a lot of skills that they don't need to play out yet. but they're there, and I've seen them play out in different ways, and it was the same with us. I mean, I was 35 and Chris was 30 when we got here, and we just, something that was dormant in us came out under the circumstances.
But I would say that, the challenge now is there's a lot more distractions. Information now is, there's a lot more opinion being expressed, which has nothing to do with research and facts and policy that have been worked on for, decades, where people really know that this is really how we need to move forward. And so there's more distrust because of the disinformation. But I think, there's a lot of common sense though. And it's not being exercised right now, but but we all have, and when you talk about that dormancy, to me it's common sense. And common sense isn't that common right now. And so we need to go back to that because, that's listening to our, the collection of our inner voice, because, we all have those voices in our head. And we probably need to stop listening to the critical ones so much, because that's always nurtured, and really listen to those other parts of ourself that, we know, and it just feels right, because you just feel a cohesion when, you start telling yourself things that are, just make sense to you. And it's not about, being self-destructive, but it's also not about piety either. It's that place in between, that balance where you have choices, and you want to be able to maintain those choices in your life. Not like a zillion choices, but like a few that just kind of resonate and that would be best for you. And everyone around you, which is the other piece to this, which is, and I think the part that we really wanted to talk about today was, we have been very community oriented, and we decided when we got here that we were going to get to know people and base our life on relationships and quality relationships. And that was started by the people that, because there was a group that was in Crestone that, they held on, to Crestone, and for whatever reason they were either born here or were, here, kind of came in early on, and so they had basically spent their lives here, and they kind of liked the way things were. And then you had people like us who were part of what was called the, owner-builder wave, where we were trying to, quite honestly, neither one of us came from inherited wealth. So it's like, man, if we're going to do anything, it's got to be sweat equity. And we'd like to go someplace where we could experiment and build something that we're comfortable in, where we don't have to, jump through all these hoops other than plumbing and electrical inspection, and just, build something for ourselves so that we can have some level of stability. And that took a long time. I mean, we really got probably the shell and really being able to live in it probably.
It was 9 years we were in the garage.
Yeah, so it was like a dozen years before we kind of got to that point. And then, we haven't really, I mean, we're like, halfway there really. But still, it's, you can make it work and, and all that stuff. But what drew us instead was, what was happening around us and the people that were here. And, just to give you an idea, because the Baca was really settled by the World War II generation. And when we got here, they looked at us and they were like, uh-oh, like what are these, young, kind of hippie, but not really, because they knew better than that. But it was like, what are you young people doing here? And so we were like, no, we're here to help. And so there was a level of respect that I hope, if nothing else, we can really carry on. Because even though, things were looked at a little differently, there was still so much in common, because those people were also community oriented. And I mentioned to you before, the Baca was built for that generation, but they didn't want to be here. Like those 20 couples really were like pioneers, because they were a little unusual for their generation. But, you know, the baby boomers, you know, loved it here. And so that's, you know, what this place is attracting now. And then that next generation that's going to come in and take over. So, it, you know, for us, just watching that whole thing is so beautiful because, you know, the people that were there, and it was like Barbara and George Susans. George Susans, he worked for the FBI. One of his greatest moments was like being a bodyguard for Martin Luther King. And his wife, Barbara, went and you know, made sure that there was a library here and made sure that Moffett School was accredited, because Moffett School wasn't even accredited when people started moving here in the 70s. And, you know, it was, you know, Hal and Doris Reinhardt. Hal, like, ran the YMCA for, like, you know, had a huge position for the entire country. And so there was a real feeling of wanting to, you know, you know, elevate people and do what's right and good for people. And, you know, Max and Betty Caldwell, you know, he was on the fire department. They started the fire department here. Don Duff, who like did all the reporting for Saguache County News, and Beth and Bob Carlson. Beth was an EMT. She got the whole EMT thing going here. And Bob was a ham radio operator. And it's like, you know, but it was like people that were just like really entrepreneurial in their own way, but, you know, but in a service-oriented way.
And they picked things that were really like imperative and important.
They were infrastructure builders.
Yeah, and they didn't worry about, you know, things that were not necessary.
Because you know what quality of life means really? It's when people have an infrastructure they can rely on. That brings quality of life. That means you can have water quality and you can have air quality because you have a healthy infrastructure. And, you know, so I'm very wary of people that, you know, just want to always throw the baby out with the bathwater and want to start, you know, we'll do, you know, start a revolution and we'll do it all over again a better way. Well, what do we got here that works? And how can we keep that working for everybody? And then add on to that or change it or adapt it. And
so if you're weary of that, what would you say to people who come into the community, and what advice would you have?
I'll go back to this movie called Lost Horizon, and these people are stranded in Shangri-La in the middle of the Himalayas, and one of them was complaining about, it's like, you know, we're so far away from civilization here, and the abbot of the monastery there says, "Are you certain that you're so far away from civilization, really?"
how about bringing it with you?
Yeah. So, I mean,
And that's really it. I mean, you know, people were really, and hopefully this will continue, but people are civilized. And respect is important, and being kind and to each other is important. And that was like, that's kind of how, you know, it started out here. I mean, people were like, we're gonna start there.
Yeah.
And that's how, and we're gonna move forward from there.
yeah, we're not assuming that what's here is bad.
Right.
Right, and I mean, I get triggered by people coming to town and wanting to tear it all down and start over, because I feel like there's not an understanding or acknowledgement
Sure.
of what is,
Right.
which is a huge part of the reason we're making this.
Well, and you know, think about, you know, when you first got here, how many years does it really take to absorb what's even here?
But I got on a committee the first year, and I was like, let's do something. And
Yeah.
then I was like, oh, okay. And now I'm really anti-committee.
Well, you know, no, I think committees are good actually,
No,
and they
I'm
can do good.
anti-committee for the first year.
Oh, right, yeah. I mean, it takes a while to absorb, and you can't help but bring with you, you know, where you came from. But that may not. It may, but it may not really adapt or be appropriate here. And you have to be willing to and be open. And when you talk about open, that's really what you're talking about. You have to be open to letting stuff go that really doesn't matter anymore, and it really isn't relevant anymore. And that's the hard part. because people want to continue that because that's their identity. But it really isn't. It's an illusion. But that's the infrastructure that that you came with, and that, internally. So that's what you want to continue, because that's me, right? Even though, is that really me? Do I really need that anymore? And so and I think, if we had the luxury of anything, it was the opportunity to actually have the time to really, try and develop that level of discernment. Like, what do we really even need? I mean, because we were like almost going like for a while there on like, just a couple $100 a month, but we were very involved. I mean, he was developing the fire department. I was out in the valley organizing people, but there was no money involved. But it was enough. We would just try and keep things going. We volunteered for years, actually, and still do.
Yeah.
And I think it's important to maintain that level of vitality, because that's really, I think, where the creativity and good ideas come from.
Did you have more people you wanted to?
Oh, it goes on. I mean, it's like
It's a subpopulation.
and it's interesting because they're. I guess you could say everyone probably grew up in the United States, but everybody was really from somewhere else, and that's what this place attracts. It's been called a place for urban refugees, and so, but it was people from all over the country that had very different experiences. So like Tom Blunt was the county assessor, and he was like this really great Republican who just wanted to make sure that things stayed clean, and that people were being treated fairly, and he got along with the Desane clan and the Canes, who were like came in with this very countercultural attitude, but wanted to educate children and treat children well, and so but everybody just kind of like mixed it up and got along.
What year was your son born?
He was 1998.
1998.
Yep.
And how was it raising a child here?
It was a blast. I mean, it was, as somebody put it, it was, your life is, it is about to change dramatically. But the good news is you won't even remember what your former life was really like.
Or even miss it.
Or even miss it. That's right.
Yeah.
And it was a safe place to bring kids up. And the one thing that was different from the way we grew up was that there were no neighborhoods to speak of. You couldn't just like run outside and run down the street and pick up some friends, but you had to coordinate all this stuff with vehicles and so on. But other than that, I mean, they had free reign. They could go and do a lot of things. Ironically, the thing you had to worry about most was wildlife, big wildlife. Taking your kid.
We had an old timer who went to school here. He called his generation free range children.
Exactly right. Yeah. And Marlon is now up in Boulder, and he's going to college there. But he's of the mind where he couldn't wait to get out of here, and he actually left here a year early and didn't finish high school in Boulder. And then the first couple of years he was at the university, he just wanted nothing to do with Crestone, and now he's actually starting to miss it. Mm-hmm. And it's an anchor point for him anymore. I mean, he comes back here and he gets replenished and nourished, but the culture shock for him up there is different. He says, there are people up here, they don't even know who they are. And it's like all of us down here, we all knew who we were, we got along, you had each other's backs, and it's like there's a real cohesion for the kids that all grew up together here. No matter what they do with their lives, they have that anchor.
And it was interesting because and it was actually a friend of Marlon's pointed this out, and he said, even if you knew, you were with somebody and you knew you didn't really get along with them, you didn't really feel that comfortable with them, you learned how to do that anyway. You didn't ignore. You really couldn't ignore. You didn't get on your device. You didn't get on like something that you're watching. You worked it out. You worked out the relationship. And if anything can come from places like this, it's people that really want to keep doing that
and connect.
Because I think that's really important. And well, clearly, because I just it just makes life a lot easier to live.
On a logistical note, I forgot, it's really helpful when we're editing this to, if you can almost rephrase the question, so if I'm like,
Oh, okay.
how
Sure.
was,
Sure. Sure.
you know, and you could be like, oh, my son, blah, 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 or something
Right, right.
like that. But, you mentioned, Chris, when you first came here, that there were the people who had more of a historical tie here versus the urban refugees. When you first showed up, were you aware of that dynamic?
Oh, yeah.
Oh yeah.
Oh,
Yeah. In fact, I was just, looking at, the Crestone, Steve McDowell, Johnny Hayes, Sean Homer, Willie McDowell, Glenn Ainsworth, Helen and Cecil Pickett, and it was like,
Frank and Katie.
and then Frank Snyder, who like challenged the town all the time, and it was just great because it was sort of like, I began to realize, because when you first get here, you're like, oh, Crestone, Baca, that should just become one, one entity. And then once you're here for a while, you're like, no, I can see why Crestone doesn't want to be part of the Baca. Oh my God, no, they need to maintain autonomy, and but you have to, that's why, it's good to like just step back and watch for a while, and not make assumptions, because once you start seeing, and of course everybody's getting along really well now. I mean, Moffitt and charter school are getting along so much better now, and it takes time, and the reason that these jurisdictions are set up is really more for pragmatic reasons rather than for relationship reasons, because you can go wherever you want, talk to whoever you want, and it's it doesn't matter. It's just to manage, so things are managed better, for these different entities. So, but it's funny how you come here, everybody should just be one, and it's just sort of like, well, maybe not. No, we probably do need all these different aspects.
Well,
We do need this diversity of, perspective.
And I think there's a lag time that needs to be acknowledged too. Is like, I mean, people have always said this, the Crestone and Baca should merge, and it's kind of like, and I found myself eventually saying, no, they shouldn't. People who come to the Baca have some stuff to work out. They need to process whatever their eggshell is and whatever they came in with, and then they can kind of integrate better, and because they're more open to being integratable, and Crestone in the meantime has got to keep that stuff at bay, because there's a lot of people who come in and they want to change everything, and again, they don't pay attention to what's already here, and they don't acknowledge it, and they certainly don't respect it. And so as far as I see it, is like, work it out in the rumpus room, and then you can come in. then you can come in and play and eat with the adults. And there's plenty of adults here that are just wonderful people. So.
Yeah, and there's plenty of adults in the Baca.
There are now, yeah. I mean, I think when it used to be like people would just come in and get out of here in about 3 years, and you'd watch them process, and they'd leave a pile behind them, and then they'd go on, and then you'd have to clean up the pile, and
But it wasn't bad. I mean, if people need to do that, that's fine.
it is.
And hopefully, no damage done.
But that's because you put some breaks in place.
Yeah, and this is, and I'm going to kind of go off on a tangent here, but I was part of like the covenants, rewriting of the covenants in the late 90s. And there were some great people on that committee, Robin Blankenship. And I wanted to mention some of what I call the transition makers that kind of came in. But, one of the things she brought up, and she kind of insisted on it. And at the time I was like, but I really kind of appreciate it now. She's like, all I'm saying, because we're both owner-builder people, it's you have to, keep your, and she kept saying it, you got to keep it neat and tidy. You got to keep it neat and tidy. I mean, we're not here to like shit all over the landscape. Mm-hmm. We really got to keep it together. And if that means keeping things kind of, so that, stuff isn't going to be blowing all over, and, because there are people here that literally turn their place into dumps, like literal dumps. And I cleaned up a couple of those when they left. And it's like, wow, like, where are you at? That you would just like, and these are people that really believed in like the sacred, right? And it's like total desecration of the landscape, just, you know, piles of garbage, and you're just like, wow, you know, come on, you know, you can do better than that, you know, and so I get what she's saying about that, and we've always been ones to say, you know, we value our property, so therefore it has property value. So it doesn't matter that stuff is finished or that, you know, things aren't like perfect, you know, in terms of, you know, our home. The reality is, you know, we're maintaining it, it's comfortable, people feel comfortable when they come, you know, we want it to be inviting. And it's like, you know, that's really, you know, I think the essence of it. You know, you want to, you know, respect the landscape that you're building in. And, you know, there's, you know, yeah, I think that's a really important value. And it has nothing to do with how much money can I make off this. It's a very different mindset. And because the reality is, and there are people that, you know, came here to flip lots, they came here to flip houses, you know, and that's really their mindset. You know, that's, but what people don't realize is they're really doing themselves a disservice, because you end up removing yourself more and more from what probably would bring you any sort of real happiness, you know, because you're monetizing everything, which is, you know, again, we started talking about that when we first sat down. It's like, you know, it doesn't really solve anything, because, you know, you're busy then managing this other thing that really has nothing to do with this place, really. Because we're all investors, right? I mean, and so let's invest. And not, you know, not so much want to control the outcome. Manage well, absolutely. But control, it really doesn't serve any purpose, because we're part of a much larger landscape. And let's see if we can, you know, have this place, which has been here far longer, teach us something as well.
Speaking of landscape, Mark, do you remember the first time you saw the mountains?
Yeah. We were living in New York City, and I was working up in the 90s, if that means anything to anybody. And I was working on this building with another guy, and the guy that I was working with was the guy who actually built the ziggurat. And so he and I got to talking about this place, and it just intrigued me. And it was similar to another experience I'd had, so I really wanted to like relive that in a way. So I came out here on a Labor Day weekend, and when I came over Kenosha Pass, it was just like, holy crap. It's, I mean, I'm living on a planet, you know, I finally remembered that, you know, and then I get into the San Luis Valley after Poncha, and I'm just like coming down, and I actually overshot the road to Crestone, and I'm coming back and I'm looking at the Segways, and I'm just like, holy crap. I mean, I was just like blown away. And I'd already set it up to meet a real estate guy, but I didn't know what I was going to do for sure. And I met him, and I said, you know, can you show me someplace that's up high with a big boulder on it, you know? He said, I got just the place. And he took me up there, and I said, I'll take it. And then I went back to the airport, called Chris, I said, I just bought some land in Colorado.
Well, what you said was, and we were living
yeah.
on the Lower East Side in a crack neighborhood,
Yeah.
and it was really intense at that time. And you know, it was the late '80s, and I think people who were around then remember that was just a really crazy time. And so we were seeing, like, literally, he's saying, he says, I'm seeing deer eating crab apples off the tree, and I'm literally looking out, and there's like this huge thing going down, like right on the, you know, street, you know, where people are like, you know, the drug deals are going down, people are fighting, you know, and I'm just like, okay, I think that, you know, that sounds really good.
That's a nice contrast.
That's a nice contrast. Though I have tremendous respect for New York City, and I love New York City, and the people there are amazing. Yeah, but anyway.
That's extreme. Straight
Oh, yeah.
from New York City to
Yeah.
Willow Creek Trailhead.
Yeah, and when we got here, we actually got here on July 15th of '88, and we ended up staying up at the campgrounds,
For a couple months.
And we ended up becoming the camp host by default. And so we lived in a tent, you know, and just lived by the stream for months. And there's something to that, you know, laying next to a stream just washes a lot of stuff away. I mean, I had some real nightmares about the Lower East Side while I was camping there. But even that got washed away eventually, and finally you just start feeling like, oh, you're here instead of back there, you know. And transition is always hard for whoever, whenever they move someplace so dramatic and so different. But yeah.
Were the bugs out?
Yeah.
They were. Yeah, I mean, it wasn't a big deal. At that point in time, as I remember,
It was monsoon season.
yeah, I mean, you'd get this nice drizzle starting about 2 in the afternoon and last till 4, and then it would be over, and that happened every day. And you'd hang your tent up in a tree and let it dry out, and then put it back down and camp again.
If all of your POA and community member and town council and charter school dreams could come true, what would it look like?
Well, I think it's important to remember that it takes a lot of guts to move to a place like this, and it's very stressful. I mean, it's easier to find jobs now than it used to be, but it's still not easy. And there's a lot of stress put on people, and if they're building, that's one of the top 5 stresses in a person's life is building a house. And if anything, I'd like to see the POA back off on making that a hard process. The easier they can make that process for people, the better. As Chris says, there's times you have to kind of put some cohesion to the process, and people have to like keep their word as well. And so I think for the POA, they need to strike a better balance on how to encourage owner builders and not discourage them. One of the things that we seem to have pioneered was there were some of the older people that Chris mentioned that were hard on the owner builders. They just thought you're wrecking their property values and things like that. But we dove in and became we were the fire department, we were the EMTs, and we were valuable because of that. And they knew that they couldn't run into a burning building anymore, and we were the young Turks to take that on. And we established and promoted a value to being a younger person here and being an owner builder and making it a credible niche for these older people to create some trust with.
Damn straight. And I mean, you and some other people in y'all's generation created an example for me to aspire to.
Aw.
And started building a form of community that we wanted to be a part of.
Yeah.
And it kind of makes me concerned that maybe that's harder to access now for new people. But
It's the avenues are still there. The motivations are a little different, maybe, but firefighting in particular is not it's a young man's sport, and the older you get, the harder that putting on an SCBA in a bunker is. But
unless you're Warren.
Unless you're Warren, and Warren is he's a mighty force, and but it's like the opportunities are there, and I'm seeing that there is a bit of a new renaissance for that avenue now. There's younger people who are taking on those positions, and good on them. And the more people who do that, the better it is. It's not because it should be an obligation. It should be because it enhances your life. It makes your life richer to be involved in your community, and to be a young adult and then an older adult. You achieve a certain stature in a tribe, and And it's a stature that feeds back to everybody and makes their quality of life better. And everybody, not everybody should be a firefighter or an EMT. There are plenty of other ways, however, to make this community a stronger and more resilient community, but involve volunteerism. And sometimes you need to get some money injected into that process, and there is money out there. And sometimes you can do that through the POA and taking those POA dues and generating and channeling them to good goals that may not necessarily be something that somebody in Guam would think is beneficial, but that's why they're living in Guam, because they're not living here. And I think the people who live on the ground here really do have a better feel for what this place needs, and to allow for that kind of an input is something that the POA really does need to keep in mind. As far as Crestone is concerned, I've never really dealt with much of the Crestone politics, other than to say, we should not merge because...
Well, that's not true, though. You really were actively involved in getting the Crestone Fire Department and the Baco Fire Department to work well together.
That's
with
true.
The Saguache County
That's true.
Fire Department.
Yeah, we did do that. But as far as the town council politics particularly, no,
Yeah.
yeah, you're right. But yeah. And again, I think that the Baca would swallow Crestone, given half a chance. And the Baca is kind of historically not as stable in some ways, because people come in, they get on the board right away, and they want to shake things up. And if they imbued that on Crestone, they would throw Crestone in a whirlwind.
But I think what you're saying, and I think what we've really, if anything, we've tried to emphasize is, cooperation and coordination. And, if everybody's coming in with their own ideas, it's like, a lot of chiefs and not a lot of Indians. I mean, people come in with all these great ideas, but it's like, well, what's already here? How can we enhance what's already here instead of trying to recreate this whole other idea? Now, sometimes that's absolutely necessary, and I get that. But, a lot of times it's just coordinating what's already here so it functions better, and then cooperating to see, and that's not to say, I mean, in these times, and I keep bringing this concept of horizontal leadership, but I think we really need to do both. I mean, we need to be part of a team and come together and just know, okay, that person's going to handle that. Great. I'm not going to do. So you're going to do that? Okay, so I'll do this. And what you find is, like, everybody has their own skill set and inclinations. And if everybody brings that together, you usually end up with a pretty nice, and I live by this, because I have to deal with one working group after the other with all these issues that have bombarded this place. We got the national park legislation passed, and we've had to deal with oil and gas leasing, and we've had to deal with, Village at Wolf Creek, and, all these things that just keep bombarding the valley as a whole, and, regional waste diversion and recycling. I mean, it just goes on and on. Solar and solar development, how to coordinate that with the grid that already exists and all those things. And it's sort of like, but what's already here? And then what you find is these individuals come together and become part of a working group. They all have these different skill sets, and you move it forward, you move it so that it can transition. And to me, that's like absolutely essential right now, to have and to be willing to be part of that mindset, because it's a zone. And we all know what we're talking about. It's a zone that you just kind of go into, and you're just going to know. And it's like the people I have met in this valley from that life, it's just extraordinary. I mean, there are some amazing people, and it's just like, and you just feel this, people just feel this kind of, inner voice to step up. And when that happens, it's just beautiful to see the organic kinds of social fabric infrastructure that gets created around that. And you know, it's like I find that you know, because this community is wrought with this construct. Let's start this construct, and we're gonna see where it goes. You know, and they're trying to always lay this structure on everybody, and it's like, and you'll be on that committee, and you'll be on that, and it's like, well, how about coming together and everybody like figuring out how they would like this structure to look, or what's already here, and how can we enhance that? You know, to me, it's one, it's a lot easier, and two, it's a lot more fun, because people are not really that comfortable with hierarchical, you know, structures, even though they can be very necessary sometimes, like the incident command system, and I wish I had a visual here, but there was a guy, Bob, remember, with the Colorado State Forestry Service. Mm-hmm. He was just a brilliant guy, and he was trying to teach all the fire department, which was like Vietnam vets and, you know, people that were really had gotten very anti-authority, and, you know, trying to teach us the incident command system for an emergency. And, you know, you could just feel the reticence in the room. And so he shows us the pyramid, right, and the incident commander's on top, and then he just, you know, talks about the different layers. And I just raised my hand. I was like, Bob, you know, people are a little uncomfortable with that structure. It's like you're talking to us about, you know, this pyramid, and there are people that just, you know, they kind of have a resistance to that. And he says, oh my gosh, well, no, I mean, and then he says, we need to go up over the pyramid and look at it from above, and everybody needs to do that, because when you do that, you see that the incident commander is actually in the center, and it's a web, and it goes out in different directions, and everybody's connected, and it's like, wow, and he just drew it, and everybody went and just relaxed. And it's just amazing, because we really, you know, that's what we need right now. We don't need to look at it like we're on the ground looking at this huge thing. You know, we need to go over it, and because we all know how to do that, and look down on it. And then you see that there's this amazing web that all we have to do is connect into it. You know, and it just like, for me, it's like, well, you know, I had parents that were really encouraged us to question authority, but don't like just come out and challenge it all the time. Because number one, it's such a waste of energy. And two, it's like, you know, sometimes it's really important that it's there. I mean, I really like our deputy who's here. He's a great guy. And it's like, you know, Wayne. And it's like, you know, thank God he's here. And, you know, and it's like, you know, but to just come up with this mindset of like, oh, you're, you know, the sheriff's department, or you're this, or, you know, it's like, God, those things are really necessary, and thank God they're here, you know? And so it's like, you know, it's just
it's a perception.
It's a perception.
I watched our sheriff give a 4-year-old boy CPR and bring him back to life.
Wow.
A week ago.
Wow.
And as far as hierarchy and authority goes, I appreciate there being an incident commander, or a hierarchy even, or a chief. And the aspect that I need to function within that is all around the attitude of that incident commander. And I feel like there's a lot of power in them, like you're saying, being kind and respectful.
The way that's supposed to work, an incident commander is not supposed to be in charge. An incident commander is supposed to be there to give you what you need.
Well, and be decisive.
And be decisive, but
Yeah.
make sure that all of the people have what they need to do what they're needing to do. And that when I learned it that way, it was like, wow, that was a revelation. Because it's usually like, you know, kiss my ring, but it's not that. And it's the same. I mean, the incident command system is a great example, because that is the essence of community. It's like, how do we supply everybody what they need? And, you know, there's, you know, people are getting scared of the word socialism, and certainly trying to bring in communism now and to describe it instead and scare you even more. But it really comes down to a tribe. You know, what do the people need, and what makes life worth living? And life is not worth living when you suffer too much. Suffering teaches us, and that's not a bad thing. But when you're always suffering, then you give up. And I think to answer your earlier question is like, what do all of these entities in this area need to do? They need to be incident commander in the sense that give people what they need. And you see, it's actually evolved on its own. You know, nobody came in and declared themselves the warlord, and if they did, they would have gotten laughed at. But you look at neighbors helping neighbors. I mean, they do an incredible job for keeping that safety net alive. You see what they're doing with the food bank up there, and one of the local merchants they put together a situation that enhances and supports that. I mean, it's like people are good about giving around here, and as long as nobody takes too much of advantage of that, it'll be a resilient safety net. And I think that so far people are very respectful of what gifts other people are willing to give. And it's in the spirit of giving that challenges everybody to give themselves, you know. So I think that's the spirit.
Yeah, and I think, you know, it's that whole idea too of like, what does this place have for me, as opposed to what do I have to give this place? You know.
Chris, do you have hope that we can be a cohesive community in 10 years
Yeah,
that supports its people?
absolutely. Yeah, you know, I feel it very strongly. I'm really excited about the next generation. I think people are just, I'm learning so much, and from, you know, what people have to give, and it's really important, you know, especially now we're at the point in our lives where we really just need to listen to what younger people are telling us, so that we can figure out how, if, you know, since we've kind of accumulated this, whatever institutional knowledge that is, and experience that you end up, you know, because, you know, we've been hustling for 30 years and really tried to be on, you know, keep our feet on the ground and really, you know, pay attention to what's going on. And at this point, okay, so how can I plug what was being said to me and listen to that and figure out how to, you know, implement that, you know, to the best of my ability, until I'm clearly, you know, it's going to get to a point where I'm not going to be able to do that so well anymore. But I am right now. I feel like my mind is like, I'm really starting to see it. And I want to have the time to be able to kind of get some of that stuff in place, some of that infrastructure in place. You know, I've been involved in starting 5 nonprofits in this valley. Orient Land Trust, the Sangre de Cristo National Heritage Area, the Rio Grande Headwaters Land Trust, Canals Clean Water, and well, and of course the
mine cleanup.
the Summitville mine cleanup, which you know, now they have a wastewater treatment plant up there, and you know, Citizens for San Luis Valley Water, which was focused on the water, and then the Ecosystem Council, which was started by another group, but we ended up sponsoring them, and then I ended up becoming director. But anyway, long story short, because I knew we needed a public lands advocacy organization here. But, and of course, a lot of people were involved in all those things I'm talking about, but I was really involved with creating the 501c3, and which is what you have to do when you go to the IRS and say, can we be legitimate? Can we be a public interest organization? And so you have to go through the hoops. And, you know, I feel really good about that, you know, because it's like, you know, and so, you know, that's kind of where my mind goes, like, because it's, you know, it's just where I'm driven, but it's, you know, how can I figure out ways of protecting landscapes, core habitat areas, biodiversity, you know, so that, you know, all these species, whatever ones end up being able to survive climate change, you know, how can they keep moving? How can they keep adapting? Because I believe there's an intelligence to all life, you know, and I'm fine with that. I don't need to know anything else. I don't need to know about any other structures that, you know, may or may not happen after I'm no longer in my body. I'm just glad to know. And I feel it, and I absolutely feel connected to that intelligence, to all life. And that's good enough for me. So how can I keep that going in my own way? And, you know, I think that's really, you know, And I don't think I'm alone. I think other people feel that way too. So how do we all do that? You know, in a way that feels genuine to us.
And to continue with that, it's an evolution. I mean, when we came here 31 years ago, you know, we never expected that we were going to be involved in all of these public discourses, let alone actions. And we've evolved in that 31 years, the two of us have, and along with all the other people who did the same thing. And now we look at this newest water iteration, and you're just like, God, you poor little kids. You know, you think that this is a big deal. This is really an important thing to do. You are missing so much. I mean, you're getting fixated on one little Power Ranger, and there's a whole universe here.
You being the people that want to export the water.
Yeah. And we watch. I mean, it really is like watching a kid try to manipulate his parents. You know, it's they're lying. They're doing all this thing that kids do, and as a responsible parent, you like just guide them through that phase, and you know, well, maybe that doesn't work so well. Da 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 da. But it's like now you have to do it with people who are near your own age. You know, and you're just like, all these years and you're still there, you know, and you're not seeing how much glory there is to living, you know, and it's not all about dollar signs. You know, sure, I mean, people got to make a living, and I get that, but
people need to feel stability too.
And here's an anecdote for this particular project. It's like there was a one winter way back when in the 90s sometime, and there was like one building project going on, and there were like 14 of us, and one guy kept us all employed through the winter, and none of us were making a lot of money, but we were all making something, enough to get through the winter. And,
$5 an hour.
Yeah, but it was enough to put, you know, food on the table and a little propane in the stove, you know.
But they all shared it.
They all shared it, and interestingly, the
Well,
same.
you all shared it.
Yeah, well, trickle down. But interestingly, there was this one $20 bill, because it was just Kurt's store, and I think maybe a restaurant at the time. I can't remember which one, but there were precious few places to spend money around here. But there's this one $20 bill that had some kind of writing on it that was very noticeable.
This was, and it said, "This is the one $20 bill." So,
Maybe it did.
Yeah, somebody wrote that. This is the one $20 bill, and everybody
And
kept.
it's like, oh, I got it this week. And it was such a wonderful absurdity about what the monetary system really is, because it's just about, I'm going to give you this so that I don't have to bring a shank of a sheep's leg, drop it on the table, carve off a few pieces for change, and then you give me a log. You know, I mean, it's like, it was a revelation on what living in a small area really is, and I mean, it really kind of made that winter in a lot of ways. You know?
You were talking about, as we show up as community members, the value of listening to what is already in place.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk about your appreciation or valuing of the old timers that were already in place when you came?
Oh, and I actually kind of wrote some thoughts down.
Or
but-
the
but-
history of you?
Yeah, I mean, and I called them. I kind of, for this thing, just to kind of collect my mind, I called them the transition makers. And they were just people that were here, but you could tell they were really into like kind of, creating some juice, and in their own way. And Robert Filio and Ann Silver were absolutely part of that. Art Troil and Annie Waxman, amazing artists that were right here, had the old Adobe, had the most amazing parties. Oh my God. And just like you could go and talk to them anytime, and they totally would put you in this space where you just like walked out feeling like you were connected to everything again. I mean, it was just, and Bobby Troutman, who was this amazing craftsman who built the
dome.
the
at
dome
Linda's Farm.
up at Linda's Farm, which became the Zen Center. Bobby, he was so talented, and he advised like probably everybody on how to build their home, and would always give them ideas. Never asked anything in return. He was a Vietnam vet, and he was just like so, like he just loved doing that. And that's what drove him. And then every so often he would make bookcases or something to kind of keep his thing going. Bertha got her up, and you know, her connection with Linda's Farm and the Zen. Well, she probably left when it became the Zen Center, but Bertha was just like a place where, you know, people could go see Bertha.
She was this incredible potter, but you'd just go over just to, you know, you'd feel like you needed to talk to somebody, you know, because you're just like, what end is up right now, you know? And you just go over and would you like some coffee?
Yeah.
And she'd make this bomber coffee that just, you know, and would you like some honey in that? And she was, I mean, Bertha was like, she was like Maud from Harold and Maude. I mean, she literally nursed concentration camp people back
Survivors.
to life after the war.
Yeah.
And
Did she have a teenage boyfriend?
no.
No.
Not
that we knew about.
Yeah.
Barbara Barnett and John Milton. I mean, just had a tremendous influence on this place, and they were just kind of figuring out, you know, how they were going to work with people and connect people, and they're still around, which is absolutely wonderful. Gerald and Gisela at the Cresto Mountain Zen Center. I mean, oh my God, they were so amazing, and they would have people up and just make these amazing lunches. You know, so, you know, and just for nourishment, you know, and then we'd help them at the, you know, do some stuff, because they were part of the owner-builder group too. Tom and Lillian McCracken, Green Earth Farms, Paramananda, Margot Williams. I mean, organic farming, Sawash, you know, that's where I spent my first 3 summers just working there and learning so much about, you know, how do you grow this high quality food
In this high altitude.
in this high altitude, and they just like, I mean, they really put themselves out there to do that, you know. I mean, these are all risk takers in their own way. The ashram, Ram Lodi, J.D. Marston, Radisham, I mean, just really providing a place for people to go and to be able to, you know, participate in fire ceremony and things like that, and really are still committed to that.
They're
Carmelites.
softball right now.
Yeah, Mark Elliott, you know, I mean, he brought, you know, and you know, the whole, you know, this amazingly high quality documentation of, you know, what's happening, and being very involved with the building of the stupa,
large stupa,
you know, which was like a huge undertaking, and you know, really kind of tried to, you know, basically give people a focus for, you know, creating a transmitter that you know, really tries to bring, you know, well-being. You know, and I mentioned the Desane clan and how much they love children and how much they tried to really cultivate, you know, what ended up becoming the Crestone Charter School. Frank Snyder, oh my God, and I just have to say this because it's like, you know, people are into this dark light, you know, and it's, to me, it's like, it's so irritating. Because it's like, come on. I mean, you know, we all need to integrate right now. You know, Frank Snyder had the liquor store, but Frank was really a visionary, and he really was connected to these mountains. And sometimes he'd come up on his horse past our house, and he'd go up into the mountains, and we'd come out because we'd hear the clip clop, clip clop, clip clop. You know, we'd come out, and he'd be coming by. You know, we know he was going to spend a couple days up in the mountains, and he'd go, "I'm going to church." You know, I mean, he totally got it, you know. And what did he say to you about the, you know, the universe? And,
I mean, what was really cool about Crestone was that, you know, you just run into somebody on the street, right? And instead of like making small talk and chit chat, you just like, so what are you doing today? And then somebody's like, well, this is on my mind, and they just kind of like give you this whole thing that they were just like, chewing on, and it's like, wow, cool, Well, so I run into Frank one day, and he just stops me, and he's just like, the universe and the earth and the planets and the fucking comets and the fjords in Norway and the goddamn dolphins jumping in the Pacific Ocean and fucking parrots down in the Amazon, and it's like, it's all a big accident, but it's an accident in our favor.
It's just like, but it's, and I appreciate that so much because, this whole thing of like, this whole, almost like bipolar, like dark light, concept. And it's like, come on, we're all both, get over it. Let's integrate it, okay? And just like become, like, let's not expect like certain people to suffer. Let's all carry that. And then let's sublimate it so that we can make everybody's lives better. But this whole thing of like, some people are just, they're here to, no, we're all here to suffer. And we're all here to sublimate. And we're all here to deal with our own darkness. And you know what, if we can, let's take out other people's darkness as well, as much as we can handle. And let's just try and like transform everything instead of living in these rarefied pretend conditions that really don't exist. Even though they're very important to bring in, and I'm totally for it, but let's just like, really try and bring it together and then see what happens instead of trying to remove ourselves from what we don't want to be dealing with. And I just feel like that's so frustrating because it's here, and it's sanctimonious and really doesn't serve much of a purpose.
So, I'm just going to check that. I'll be right back. I'll ask you the same question, but about the pre-transition makers. So, about the people.
What did we learn from the old guard?
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh.
What did we learn from the old guard?
Or how did you, or did you acknowledge or honor their place in history here?
Well, number one, and you didn't think about this right away, but it was like, it was always there, and you always kind of did remember it. It was like, these were people who survived World War II.
Hold on, I gotta quiet this, people.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
That's important.
we'll leave back in. It's okay.
And the depression.
Yeah, that's a good point.
I'm in a good spot.
You got a car blocking their exit.
Oh, okay.
Blue van.
Alright. Yeah. Blue van. Okay, I'll check. Who drives a blue van?
Not the silver van?
No.
No, not me.
I got a silver
Yeah, you got silver van. Alright. Well, we'll deal with that in a minute.
van.
Okay, so the question is, what did we learn from the old guard? And eventually you really come to acknowledge that underpinning of intergenerational sacrifice. I mean, these people threw their lives on the line so that, we would have a potentially free future. And so this is really kind of the first time I'd rubbed up against it. Because I grew up in a much larger town. It wasn't a big thing. You'd see people on Flag Day, but that was, you just didn't quite make that connection. But here you are, you're talking with people, and, there was a guy named Hal Reinhardt, and he flew in a B-52, which was like, it was a death sentence for most of these guys. I mean, so many of those things went down with a crew of, 13 people or something, over and over and over again, and he made it through. And he was still a nice guy. And you looked at that, and he's like, and then like Chris pointed out too, these people have lived through the Depression. And there was a great anecdote. She did the census at a certain point in 1990, and she runs into this guy out in Casita Park, and
Yeah, no, actually they had a place.
oh, whatever. But yeah, okay. So
Bob Jones, he was the jeweler, and he was like third generation jeweler. He was the grandfather of the jeweler that jewelers that were in Alamosa at the time. And he and his wife Maybelle would escape from their nursing home in Alamosa and come up here. And that's how I was able to run into him. But anyway,
But then, so Chris, it's like, so what was the Depression like for you guys? And one of them, probably Maybelle, said, we loved it. It's like nobody had anything. So we all just threw everything in a pot and like shared.
yeah,
said-
everybody was really nice to each other.
Yeah, and then when prosperity started coming in afterwards, it's like, people kind of split away and they wouldn't see each other and the connections were kind of dwindling. And it's like, he says, I miss that. I miss that level of living with people. So anyway, so we learned that from these people too. I mean, they were supportive of each other. You would watch how convivial they would be with each other. They'd go back to their separate houses. But they worked on boards together. They cooperated. One of these people actually mortgaged their house to pay for the fire department building in the Baca. I mean, they were into sacrifice for a greater good. And we learned from that, and we had some friction. There was this one guy who was just very military still. I mean, he was associated with the Air Force Academy and
Colonel Coffey.
and
Yeah.
and he was the president of the POA at a certain point in time. And when we got up here, we could not get the water even across the street for
Months.
months. And so when we finally did, I'm digging a ditch from the street back to where we're gonna build, and I'm literally up to here in a ditch with a shovel, throwing like that, and Coffee and the administrator for the POA, PD Lipscomb, come driving up and start taking Polaroids of the fact that we're not done, right? Because you had to be done in 6 months, right, or significantly complete. And I'm just like, what is this about, right? And this is ridiculous. And I was mad, I was just like, God, I'm busting my butt as best I can to get this done, and you're up here harassing me, literally, And so I called up Ms. Lipscomb that night, and I just said, what was going on with that? Well, we were documenting the fact that you guys aren't done. And I just said, that's what I thought, back off, and I really tore into her. And she hung up on the phone, and I just turned around and called her right back. Don't hang up on me. You're gonna hear me. And I drove my point home, right? And got done. They backed off a little bit, and we were still, we were involved with the fire and the EMTs, and I was an ambulance driver, and Chris was an EMT at this point. And this is a few years later, and we get this call to go to the Coffees, and Dick had a major stroke. Half his body was paralyzed, but we went anyway. And we're, I think it was Tim Brenner and I were on the gurney, and there was this skinny little staircase that we had to go up to get him out of his bed, put him on the gurney, and bring him back down. And we get down to the bottom of the stairs, and Dick is like laying there, and he's looking up at me with his one good eye at this point. And he uses his one good arm, and he comes up and he grabs me right about here in my bicep, and he just squeezes it and looks at me like, wow. And then it was over. I mean, that was we'd shown our worth, and he showed that he recognized it, and we never really had any problems with the POA after that, because it was like, it was this bursting of some stupid bubble that had been there for no good reason, but it had to get burst. And that's how it looked like in this particular case. So he learned from us, and we learned from him, because he wanted it neat and tidy. I mean, that was it. And you couldn't blame him for that. But we had to work out that intergenerational thing. Some of these people, their kids wouldn't come and see them. It was too far out here, or they didn't get along, or whatever. And people our age at that time kind of became surrogate kids for them in some ways, and they appreciated that. And sometimes we'd meet their kids who did come, and we became friends with them. So we, Go ahead.
I guess I'm gonna be more specific,
Okay.
and I'm gonna ask if you had any realization that there was an old guy that lived in town that used to be the head cattle herder breeder for Alfred Collins on the ranch in the 1930s and 40s and 50s, or that there was an old guy that lived in town that was born here and never left town and still lived here. Did you have any interaction or relationship with those
Either of
old
those
timers?
guys? Not a whole lot. I mean, we interacted with Frank and Katie and their kids. And Frank had his own axis to grind with some of the locals around here too. And I'm not sure what his relationship was with those guys, but the fact that there was a cattle rancher from Alfred Collins was just amazing. I didn't know about it. You know, like, it was one of those things, and it's a sad thing that, you know, you're so involved in getting your house done and all this other stuff that you're involved in, that you didn't get to know some of these people before they moved on.
But you know, I
But some
kind
we did.
I kind of had a different experience because, you know, I had to do the census, which means you have to go to every house. And what I found was some people really, and I did this, and you know, you could say that, you know, what I did was illegal, but, you know, if people didn't want to be acknowledged or recognized, like, I would just say, okay, you know, and you know, I would say, you know, that there was somebody like in that household, but I didn't take any of the information. And there were people that were very reclusive here like that. And
In town proper?
yeah, in town. Oh yeah, I mean, I did this whole area almost to north of Hooper, but I didn't do Moffett. But and then this whole and there was some really interesting characters that were holed up in some of these remote places, you know, these nooks and crannies, but in town, I mean, if they were not there that day. And I came back several times actually. I did it for a couple months, and I really, because for me it was almost like I was so curious. But you know, there are people that really wanted to stay to themselves. So I'm really glad to hear. And people came and went too. You know, people, you know, and I'm not sure what time frame you're talking about. If they were always here and never left, or
No, a lot of them, most of them left,
yeah.
but some of them didn't.
Yeah, but you know, but we really did try and meet as many people as we could for sure. Yeah, but yeah, I mean, people are. It's so interesting here how people can kind of hide out for years, and you wouldn't even know it.
Is there anything you would like to see the community as a whole between the bucket and town do to better provide for either young people or old people?
Yeah, I think particularly in the case of old people, one of the things that was a phenomenon for years and probably still is that, you know, you get to a certain age and the altitude just starts getting to you. The lack of oxygen gets to you, and people move down slope, and that hour run in either direction to a hospital is a big deal, and it's a critical deal. And you know, you get to a certain age, you start dealing with that, and it becomes a real reality. So I think, you know, having an elder hostel situation where you know, people can live on a ground floor in a nice room, with or without a roommate, some kitchen facilities, some recreational facilities, common eating areas, things like that. I think that would be a real thing, and I know that there are people who are working on that. As far as the kids are concerned, this is as old as the hills, literally. I've seen lots of kids grow up here, and they get to a certain age and they start complaining almost, you can quote them, there's nothing to do here. And where I grew up, we had to drive 20 miles to get to just some limestone cliffs. And so I really appreciate what kind of a backyard this is. And I would just, like, when some kid would say something like that, just like, get out of here, go up there. You know, watch out for mountain lions and bears, but go up there, you know, enjoy that. I mean, we worked hard to preserve that so that you can go up there and do that. So there's that. But as far as what, kids need to have, they're very sociable with each other, even though they don't want to associate with adults at a certain point. And so that niche, that 5-year space of time in a child's life, that needs to be addressed. And to have that coordinated by intelligent adults that are savvy to the issues that age group deal with, I think is a really important thing. And there have been situations that have been put together like that actually worked for a while. And as with some of these other infrastructure things, they come, they go, they hit a snag and they fall apart, whatever. But I think it's starting to come again, and I hope it does, because I think it's a very valuable thing to have. That kids can have a place where they can go, that they're somewhat supervised, and yet can mingle and be themselves and learn who they are in the presence of other kids.
And my mindset is a little bit more, I kind of go to the, pragmatic, and I it's kind of the same dilemma in a lot of ways, what are we going to do with people as they get older in housing and all that? What are we going to do with young people in housing as they come in? And a part of me is like, wow, it would be really cool if we could kind of bring them together. And, as people are, and really, because the whole thing is, everything is becoming so unaffordable. And again, it's that whole thing of, people living off real estate, and the way it was put to me in San Luis is property pimping. But, and unfortunately, and I'm not saying that people that sell real estate here, because we have good people here, and I'm not trying to, target that in any way, but the people that are buying and selling
Flipping.
Yeah. I mean, and I'm even going to go far out there and say, real estate in this country needs to be regulated, because if you can get something and all of a sudden it's like, I'm gonna, I got it for like $100,000 and now I'm gonna turn around, I've only been here for 3 months and I'm gonna sell it for $200,000. I mean, all of a sudden that becomes unaffordable to everybody else. And that wasn't like that when we first got here. People were actually still reasonable. There are houses here for $25,000.
My neighbor's trying to sell a Quonset hut for $329,000.
I mean, come on. So then it becomes like, oh, okay, so I'm like going to sacrifice my life so that you can like keep your lifestyle going.
Or what kind of neighbors am I going to get?
And it's just sort of like, to me that's, so I don't know, I and maybe there's potential with tiny homes to kind of, keep things like more affordable, but I really think there needs to be places where, and it's kind of and I think they've tried that with certain government programs that like, hey, if you stay here for a certain length of time, it can only be sold for X amount over that when you leave. And I get it, our investment is in our home. That's all we got, and I get that, and I know that you don't want to leave like totally like having lost everything. But having said that, I mean, I think we can come to a place where it's a little bit more reasonable, where it's more of a win-win situation, instead of like, I mean, I can't believe, and people are proud of it. They're literally proud of the fact that they got a piece of property for $30,000 and they were able to sell it for $100,000 within like a year and a half. And I'm like, and you did absolutely nothing to that property? I mean, how is that even possible? That I mean, why are we doing that to ourselves? Because we're doing it to ourselves. We're just making everything so hard to obtain. And it's ridiculous because people do need a place to live. That's one of the basics, food, shelter, and clothing. And how we grapple with that in this community to make it so that, that doesn't become such a crisis, because it kind of already is. That's a very good question, and maybe there's some really good people that can, come together and actually try and come to some solutions about it. But right now, I mean, with, everything is, people are, it just seems like everything is becoming a way to be able to make money off of it, you know, and it's like, you know, are we gonna like try and come up with a different model or not, you know? Anyway,
I'm remembering something that happened, I don't know, probably 15 years ago or 20 years ago maybe. Somebody had come to the POA, I was on the board at the time, and they wanted to set up a complex somewhere in the Baca, and like 3 buildings or something, and one would be for older people, one would be for families, and another one would be for single mothers. And the idea was that in the mixing of those 3 demographics, if you will, the kids who grew up in that complex would have the benefit of being with older people and learning what their own parents didn't even know yet. The parents would have somebody to watch their kids while they had to go make. I mean, it was like, it was this amorphous but intelligent use of proximity, and this last winter we had a situation. I mean, we're both still capable of carrying firewood up our steps, and we got like 25 steps, but.
yeah, we're wondering about that now.
Yeah,
That
but
was
anyway,
such a good
we're still
idea.
capable of doing it, but there was a situation this last winter where a mother with 2 sons that I happen to know decided that she wanted her kids to do some community help, so just to build their character and to make them see a bigger world. So she brought them over. We had a load of firewood. Those kids brought the firewood up, piled it up at the top of the hill, and we were just like, this is great.
Was that Noah and Gabe?
Yeah.
Good boys.
Yeah, they're good boys. And it was like that when I was a kid. You know, we would do that kind of thing for the older folks in our neighborhood, you know, and shovel their walks or whatever is what we did. But that's kind of a nice thing. That's what makes a community a little more solid, and it's good for everybody. I mean, the kids learn a lot, and you develop relationships with them. And anyway,
We're gonna need to wrap up.
Yeah.
Okay.
Is there anything that you'd like to make sure everybody hears, or something?
all right. State the intention of this documentary.
For me, this intention started with wanting to capture stories from old timers who grew up here before we lose access to those stories.
Mhm.
And as I started to hear that history, I started to recognize the bigger story, which came in with the Baca and the development and the ranch and the old timers and the miners and the history and the beginning of the spiritual centers and all of that. So I'm completely attached to the value of those stories and how they can help direct and give context to people who show up in the community,
Okay.
and how they can relate to the community and how they can help the community. And what I'm realizing is how we can rebuild and maintain the community that you guys were a part of creating.
I think what occurs to me to say is this. The benefit for me personally living here for 30 some years is it's given me the ability to see my life in a timeline, in a context, just in a simple chronology of a human life. But it's also given me a perspective of seeing humanity in a perspective in a larger span of time. And between those 2 polarities, if they even are, I see a strength of rhythm that I feel very, very connected to my own life, but also to the life of the human race, but also to the life of all the other creatures that live on the planet. And every day is richer and richer connection for being alive one more day. And for people to come in here and deny themselves that richness is, you're not valuing your own life. You're not remembering why you are alive. And what I would love to see people do is, I mean, you know, you're not going to get that right away. It's taken me 30 years to even be able to say it like that. But if the structures and the institutions and the interactions and the sociology of this place does nothing, let it please at least nurture that in our consciousnesses. So.
Ditto.